In this video, I'm going to be talking about using a HELOC to leverage your investment portfolio. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, HELOC just stands for Home Equity Line of Credit. You can actually use any form of lending you want, but obviously home equity line of credits are usually a cheap form of borrowing, or cheaper, as they are tied to the equity in your home, and banks like that. If you're new to my channel, my name is Jared Ayers. I'm a CFA charter holder and have been investing my own money for over 20 years. Created this channel to share with anyone who's interested how I think about investing and my strategies and thought processes I used when I invest my own money. So I hope you enjoy. So before we jump into this, I do want to mention this topic came to me as a suggestion from a subscriber. So I'm happy to take the time to discuss this type of levered investing. Certainly there are some benefits, obviously risks as well, and I did want to take some time to talk about those. I'll share with you a little bit more about my own opinion on this type of levered investing later on in this video, but I'll try to keep my biases to a dull roar as we kind of walk through the benefits and the risks of using borrowings, in this case HELOCs, to leverage your investment portfolio. So let's just start off by talking about why you might want to borrow using a line of credit or a home equity line of credit to begin with. Some people may use that money to take a vacation or to buy a car. Both of those uses of those funds are basically wiped out as soon as you go and purchase those things. I mean, a vacation obviously is out the window straight away. A car may hold value, but it's going to depreciate over time and ultimately be worth less when you go to sell it than it was when you bought it, plus all the operating costs, etc. So in terms of using funds, borrowed funds, why not invest? Well, it's a fairly reasonable statement to make. One of the key things about investing, if you look at returns of investments versus interest you pay on a line of credit, one thing to consider is the compound effect of your investment. So if you do have a certain interest rate on your line of credit, if you were to earn the same interest rate or basically the return on your investments as you're paying for that interest, you would actually be better off over a long period of time. And that's really driven by the compounding effect of that investment growth. Now, of course, if you're using a home equity line of credit, you can probably get a fairly decent interest rate and obviously, hopefully, be able to return on your investments a much higher interest rate than the interest you're paying on the loan itself. So ultimately, you should end up with a much greater position at the end of the time you're using to invest versus the interest you're paying over that same period of time. So that's just something to consider as well. Another point to consider with this type of leveraged investing is time horizon. So you don't really want to, in my opinion, think about the short term. You want to think about the long term. So with a home equity line of credit, obviously attached to your home, probably going to have it for quite a few years. Same with investments. I mean, markets are volatile in the short run. We all know that. If you've been through the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, you'll know all about that. So things to consider, I mean, make sure you do have a very long time horizon. And also, when it comes to making interest payments on your line of credit, you also want to be able to have your own means of doing that. So borrowing within your means, I think, is very important with this strategy. You want to keep your investments separate and compounding on their own, independent of the interest payments and borrowing that you're doing to actually fund those investments. So again, if you're stealing from your investments to pay your interest down, then you're actually taking away from your longer term returns. So just something to think about as well, how you want to set this up at the outset if this is something for you. Now, I just want to shift gears a little bit here and talk tax. I am also a chartered professional accountant in Canada, so tax is something I also think a lot about and consider, and certainly with this type of strategy there could be a lot of advantages inherent in it from a tax perspective. So the first thing is, depending on your jurisdiction, Canada, US, state or province, the interest you have paid on your home equity line of credit, if it is being used specifically for investments, is probably a carrying charge that is therefore a tax deduction. So you do want to look into that. Certainly I cannot and will not give any advice on that unless I know someone's personal situation. But that is something that is a feature kind of this type of setup. In that same breath, making sure that you keep your accounts very specific and separate. So you'll have your home equity line of credit, interest payments thereon. That's pretty easy to identify. At the same time, you also want to put all of the investments relating to those funds in a single account so that it's easy to point to. It's easy to defend and use as sort of credibility for using that interest expense as a tax deduction. So in terms of using the funds that you get from having that interest as a tax deduction, probably a good application of those funds would be either to more investments or to pay down non-tax deductible debt. You don't want to touch the tax deductible stuff because that's only going to reduce your tax deductions in the future. So just another thing to consider there. Another thing to consider is the type of account you use to hold your investments. So there's options for tax deferring these accounts and the returns that you'll earn on your investments. So RSPs in Canada and IRAs in the US, or potentially if you have room for tax-free accounts, so TFSAs in Canada and Roth IRAs in the US. Those may be other options for you. Obviously, the longer you can wait before you pay taxes on your investments, the better. And of course, if you can do it tax-free, even better still. Another thing to consider is if you are forced or have to hold those investments in a cash account, you may have the option of basically deferring paying taxes until you actually realize the gains on those investments. So do think carefully about what kinds of investments you want to hold in that portfolio, so that you basically don't really sell it for the entire duration that you actually hold those investments for. So there are a number of options of funds, ETFs, etc., that you may want to hold on to for the entire period and not sell it all, therefore not incurring any taxes. And my final point on taxes is dividends. So again, based on your jurisdiction, the taxability of dividends, it may be worth your while looking at investments that do not pay dividends if there are tax consequences of having those come to you. So I promise that's all I wanted to talk about on tax with respect to this strategy. Obviously lots there, lots to consider, and can potentially save you a lot of money / earn you a lot more money than if you completely ignored those aspects of this strategy. So as promised, I also said I would share my own opinion of this type of leveraged investing. I personally don't use other people's money, including borrowed funds, to invest. Just my own personal preference, my own risk aversion. Obviously, if you do have others' funds that you are investing and you need access to those funds for some reason in order to cover or repay whatever loans or amounts you owe, if the timing is very bad, then it's just not good. If you've lost in your investments, now you owe money that you borrowed to begin with but now no longer have. Just personally not a strategy or a situation I want to get myself into, but at the same time it may work for some people. If you have the means to pay the debt independent of your investments, if you don't mind going into debt to do that, then obviously there are lots of benefits to it. It's more of my own personal preference not to borrow money, period, even for investing. But that's completely up to every individual to make their own decisions, of course. So I hope you found that video useful. Even if this strategy is not for me, I think there are some benefits to it. Certainly some things that people may want to consider for themselves. There are advantages, obviously, if this type of thing is for you, not only from a taxability standpoint, but from a compounding standpoint and all those other points that we talked about. So obviously it's up to the individual investor to make their own decisions, and obviously you should always consult with a proper financial advisor before making any kind of investment decisions, especially leveraged ones. So again, just my opinion. If you did like the video, please do give me a thumbs up, and if you have not yet subscribed but want to see more similar content, please by all means hit the subscribe button. And any more suggestions or comments or questions on this video specifically, feel free to hit me up in the comments as well. Until next time, thank you very much for watching.